The story of ancient Egypt, is a carefully crafted myth. We are about to explore 20 mysterious Egyptian finds that challenge everything taught in history books. By the end, you will see this iconic civilization through a completely new lens, one that suggests a forgotten chapter of human history. What if the Sphinx is thousands of years older than we think, and hieroglyphs hide blueprints for technology we consider modern? How much of our past remains buried beneath the sand? That mainstream timeline is a story told in stone and papyrus, a grand narrative of pharaohs and dynasties stretching back nearly 5,000 years. According to conventional Egyptology, the story begins with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, leading to the Old Kingdom and the construction of the iconic pyramids at Giza around 2,560 years before the Common Era. This framework is built on pillars of evidence, from ancient king lists that chronicle rulers to carbon dating performed on fragments of wood and reed found at these sites. It paints a picture of a society evolving in relative isolation, developing its monumental architecture and complex religion over centuries. This is the history you learned, a clean and linear progression. Yet this established narrative rests on a series of interconnected assumptions that cultural complexity must develop slowly, that the purpose of a structure is always what it appears to be, and that our modern scientific dating methods capture the full story of stones that have stood under the desert sun for millennia. These are the very assumptions that the coming mysteries will not just question but shatter, inviting us to look at the sands of time not as a neat layer cake, but as a puzzle with pieces that may belong to a much older and far different picture. But to truly challenge a timeline, you need evidence that does not fit the official story. Our first piece of that evidence lies within the Hathor Temple at Dendera. Carved into a subterranean chamber is a relief that has sparked debate for decades. It shows a large, elongated glass bulb, inside which a snake stretches from one end to the other. This bulb sits on a stand connected by a thick cable to a box held by a kneeling figure. To the modern eye, it is an uncanny depiction of an electric light bulb, complete with a filament and a power source. The mainstream interpretation is deeply symbolic, describing it as a lotus flower emerging from the primordial waters, with the snake representing the god Harsomptus, a symbol of life and creation. It is a beautiful myth carved in stone, yet the precision of the imagery gives one pause. Why does the so-called lotus so closely resemble a clear glass vessel? Why is the serpent held perfectly straight within it, unlike the coiled serpents seen elsewhere in Egyptian art? And what is the purpose of the cable and the box, elements that feel distinctly mechanical? Those who see a lost technology point to other curious anomalies, like the complete absence of soot stains in the deep interior chambers of some temples, places where torches would have left undeniable marks. They reference artifacts like the Baghdad Battery, a clay pot from a later period that could generate a small electrical charge. The question posed by the Dendera relief is not necessarily that ancient Egyptians had fluorescent lighting, but something more profound. Could their advanced understanding of the natural world, of energy and spirit, have been expressed in a symbolic language that we, with our technological mindset, are only now beginning to misinterpret as literal blueprints? This carving forces a choice between two visions of the past, one purely mythological, and one that wonders if myth itself might be a vessel for forgotten knowledge. That carving at Dendera suggests a knowledge of energy, but to shape a civilization in stone required a mastery of force on an almost unimaginable scale. For a direct lesson in that ambition, we must travel south to the granite quarries of Aswan. Here, still lying in its bed of solid rock, is the unfinished obelisk. It is a monument not to success but to staggering intention. If completed, it would have stood over 130 feet tall and weighed nearly 1,200 tons, dwarfing every obelisk ever successfully raised. This colossal stone was not assembled, it was being coaxed in one single piece from the very heart of the planet. The surrounding quarry floor is a textbook of ancient engineering. You can see the precise trenches, mere inches wide, that workers painstakingly hammered out around the obelisk's outline using simple balls of dolerite, a stone harder than the granite itself. The geometry is flawless, but then the project was abruptly halted. A massive crack appeared in the bedrock, rendering the monolith useless. It was left exactly as it was, forever frozen in the act of becoming. And that is precisely why it is so valuable. Success can hide its methods, but failure reveals them. This abandoned giant forces us to ask the practical questions we often gloss over. How exactly did they plan to detach this 1,200-ton block from the quarry floor once the trenches were complete? Mainstream theory suggests driving wooden wedges into the trenches and soaking them with water to make them expand, creating a controlled fracture. Yet the precision required to split over 100 feet of granite without shattering the obelisk is a feat modern engineers would ponder carefully. Then comes the greater puzzle: transportation. The intended destination is unknown, but to move such a weight even a short distance over sand and rock seems a logistical nightmare. We picture sledges, ropes, and thousands of workers, a scene of immense coordinated labor. But the unfinished obelisk whispers of tools or techniques we have not considered, methods that made such a task not just possible but repeatable. This is not just a block of stone, it is a fossilized moment of supreme confidence, a blueprint of a technology that believed it could move mountains, and then suddenly, mysteriously, walked away. The sheer scale of ambition at Aswan makes us wonder about the tools they used, not just for moving stone, but for shaping their entire world. This leads us to a small, unassuming artifact found far from the Nile, yet one that casts a long shadow over Egyptian technological history. Discovered in the 1930s just outside Baghdad, a clay jar roughly 2,000 years old contained a curious assembly, a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and evidence of an acidic agent like vinegar or wine. When reconstructed, this simple arrangement, now known as the Baghdad Battery, was shown to be capable of generating a small but measurable electric charge. While its origin is Mesopotamian, its implications ripple directly into the mysteries of Egypt. If such a fundamental understanding of electrochemistry was present in the ancient Near East, is it not plausible that the Egyptians, master innovators and traders, were also aware of it? The absence of a duplicate find in Egypt is not a definitive argument against its use, as any connecting wires made of organic materials would have vanished into dust millennia ago. So what purpose could such a gentle current have served in a land of gold and gods? One compelling theory points to electroplating, the process of using electricity to bond a thin layer of gold or silver onto another metal surface. Egyptian artisans were famed for their gilded artifacts, objects that show an astonishingly even and thin application of precious metal. While chemical plating methods existed, the battery presents an elegant alternative for achieving such flawless, consistent results. An even more intriguing possibility lies within the realm of ritual and experience. Imagine a dim temple chamber, like those deep within the Great Pyramid or the crypt at Dendera. A priest, perhaps holding two metal rods connected to such a device, experiences a faint tingling sensation, a palpable vibration or a subtle spark in the darkness. In a culture where the divine was felt in natural forces, from the sun's rays to the Nile's flood, such a phenomenon could easily be interpreted as a touch of the gods, a physical manifestation of spiritual power used to deepen ceremonial practice. The Baghdad Battery, therefore, is more than a curious jar. It is a key that unlocks a door in our imagination. It suggests that the ancient world's technological landscape might have included elements we have simply failed to recognize because they do not match our modern, industrial-scale expectations. It implies a scattered, perhaps secretive, network of practical knowledge that challenges the mainstream view of these civilizations as intellectually isolated. This artifact does not prove the Egyptians had flashlights, but it firmly establishes that the basic principle necessary to create light was not beyond the reach of the ancient mind. That gentle current from a simple clay jar hints at a hidden layer of knowledge, but to see its ultimate expression we must look to the greatest architectural achievement of the ancient world. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not merely large, it is unnervingly perfect. Its overwhelming scale is what first strikes you, but the closer you look, the more its precision defies belief. Its four sides are aligned to the cardinal points of the compass with an accuracy of just 3/60ths of a single degree. To put that in perspective, this alignment is more precise than what could be achieved with the basic tools traditionally attributed to its builders. The entire 13-acre base is leveled to within less than an inch across its entire plane, a feat of surveying that would challenge modern engineers on such uneven desert bedrock. And then there are the stones themselves. Many of the core limestone blocks, weighing multiple tons each, are fitted together without any mortar. The gaps between them are so minute, often no wider than 1/50th of an inch, that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. This is not rough construction, it is craftsmanship on a colossal scale, a seamless puzzle of millions of pieces. The logistical puzzle only deepens from there. Mainstream Egyptology attributes the pyramid's construction to Pharaoh Khufu over a period of about 20 years. To meet that deadline, using the estimated 2.3 million blocks, a new multi-ton block would need to have been quarried, transported across miles, lifted hundreds of feet into the air, and set with surgical precision roughly every 2 to 3 minutes, working non-stop day and night for 2 decades. This timeline forces us to re-examine every assumption about the tools and methods available. Copper chisels used to cut softer limestone would have been useless against the granite used for the interior chambers, stone so hard it requires diamond-tipped saws today. The ramps needed to drag blocks to such a height would have been engineering projects in themselves, requiring more material than the pyramid, yet no definitive archaeological trace of their construction remains. How did they achieve such flawless optical alignment over such a vast distance without lasers or modern theodolites? How did they cut and polish granite with such perfection? The precision we see is not a decorative afterthought. It is the very signature of the build, and it suggests a masterful command of mathematics, astronomy, and geophysics that seems to leapfrog over the technological progression we expect from that era. This has led some researchers to a radical proposition. What if the precision is not a testament to how they built it, but a clue to when it was really built? Could the Great Pyramid be a relic from a far older, more advanced culture, later adopted and claimed by the dynastic Egyptians we know? The stones do not speak, but their silent, perfect alignment tells a story that the conventional timeline struggles to narrate. Precision on a monumental scale is one thing, but true mastery is revealed in the miniature. Within a first dynasty tomb at Saqqara, dating to a time when Egypt was just consolidating its identity, archaeologists uncovered an object that seems to defy its own era. It is called the Schist disc, and to call it a bowl or a plate would be a profound understatement. Carved from a single piece of brittle, dark gray schist stone, it measures roughly 2/3 of a foot across. Its form is deceptively simple, a shallow dish that flares out into 3 exquisitely thin, curved lobes, like the petals of a flower or the blades of a modern propeller. This is where logic stumbles. Schist is a flaky, layered stone that splits easily under pressure, making it a terrible choice for a craftsman aiming for delicate, symmetrical shapes. To carve this disc using hand tools without it shattering would be an exercise in near impossibility. The precision is what truly captivates. The curves of the three lobes are perfectly identical, and the entire object is symmetrical to a degree that suggests it was spun, not chiseled. The thinness of the material, especially at the edges of those graceful lobes, implies a cutting or grinding tool that applied steady, controlled force, removing material with a consistency that handheld abrasives simply cannot achieve. It looks in every respect like an object turned on a high-speed lathe. Yet this artifact was placed in a tomb over 4,600 years ago, in what mainstream history considers the technological infancy of dynastic Egypt. Its purpose is a complete mystery. It is far too fragile to have been a functional plate or a lamp. Some suggest a ceremonial offering dish or a symbolic representation of something lost to time. But its physical reality speaks louder than any theoretical use. It sits in a museum case not as a tool, but as a testament, a quiet, physical rebuttal to the narrative of primitive stone working. In a world supposedly limited to copper chisels and stone pounders, who made this, and with what forgotten machine? The schist disc asks a silent, pointed question, not about the brute force needed to build a pyramid, but about the finesse required to sculpt a stone flower at the very dawn of recorded history. But a single, delicate artifact can be an anomaly, a whisper easily dismissed. To challenge a timeline, you need evidence written not in stone, but upon it by the very hand of nature. This brings us to the silent, weathered face of the Great Sphinx. For centuries, its age was tied to the pharaoh Khafre, builder of the second pyramid at Giza, dated to around 2,500 years before the Common Era. This attribution seemed logical, a guardian carved in the image of a king to watch over his necropolis. Then, in the 1990s, a geologist named Dr. Robert Schoch looked at the Sphinx not as an archaeologist, but as a scientist reading the story told by rock itself. What he saw in the walls of the Sphinx enclosure was a narrative that did not match the official history. The deep, vertical fissures and undulating, scalloped channels carved into the limestone bedrock were not the work of wind and sand, which scours and polishes horizontally. This was the unmistakable signature of water, specifically heavy, prolonged rainfall running down the walls over vast stretches of time. This posed a profound problem. Egypt has been a hyper-arid desert for the last 5,000 years. To create the weathering patterns seen on the Sphinx enclosure would require a climate that was significantly wetter, a climate that last existed in that region during the Neolithic subpluvial, a period that ended around 3,500 years before the Common Era. If the water erosion hypothesis is correct, the core body of the Sphinx could be thousands of years older than the reign of Khafre, potentially dating back to a time before the first pharaoh, before hieroglyphs, before what we recognize as dynastic Egypt even began. The mainstream rebuttal points to sporadic, heavy rainstorms that could have occurred even in a dry period, or to weathering from rising groundwater or condensation. Yet for many, the patterns speak clearly of a different epoch. This is not a debate about artistic style or inscriptions. It is a physical fact etched into the geology. The implications are seismic. If the Sphinx is truly that ancient who carved it, what culture, lost to the sands of prehistory, possessed the organization, the skill, and the vision to create a monument of such scale and symbolic power at a time when humanity was supposedly living in simple, scattered agricultural communities? The Sphinx, therefore, is no longer just a statue. It becomes a potential relic from a forgotten age, a sentinel guarding not just a pyramid complex, but the threshold of a history we have yet to write. The silent testimony of water erosion on the Sphinx points to a forgotten epoch, but what if that lost age left more than just physical monuments? What if it left a record in the sky? This brings us to one of the most hotly debated texts in alternative history, the so-called Tulli Papyrus. The story begins in the 1930s, when an Italian Royal Air Force officer named Alberto Tulli reportedly came across an ancient papyrus for sale in Cairo. Finding its price too high, he instead made a handwritten copy of the text, which was later translated. The document, attributed to the reign of the powerful pharaoh Thutmose III around the year 1450 before the Common Era, describes an event of breathtaking strangeness. It tells of a circle of fire that appeared in the sky, lacking a head with a breath that emitted a foul odor. Its body was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide, and it made no sound. Then, according to the translation, these objects became more numerous, shining brighter than the sun in the sky. They are described as fiery disks. The account states they eventually ascended higher and proceeded southward, with fish and other volatiles, likely meaning birds, raining down from the sky afterward. The pharaoh, after consulting his wise men, had the event recorded in the annals of his house of life. The mainstream position on this document is one of deep skepticism, and for clear academic reasons. The original papyrus has never been produced for modern scientific testing. Alberto Tulli's copy is the only source, and the chain of custody is murky. Many respected Egyptologists firmly classify it as a 20th century forgery, perhaps inspired by the growing cultural fascination with flying saucers at the time. They argue that the language and style do not perfectly match other known texts from that period. This is a powerful and logical dismissal. Yet, the persistence of the story invites a different kind of inquiry, one that separates the artifact from the account. If we momentarily set aside the debate over the papyrus's authenticity, the narrative itself is fascinating for what it reveals about how ancient scribes documented the inexplicable. The description is not framed as a myth or a divine vision, but as a factual, celestial event witnessed by the pharaoh and his entire court, serious enough to be archived alongside other important records. The details are oddly specific and mechanical. A circle of fire with precise dimensions, an odor, a brilliant light, and a coordinated departure. It reads less like a religious text and more like a military report. This forces us to consider a profound question, completely independent of the papyrus's truth. How would a highly advanced yet pre-technological culture interpret and record an encounter with something utterly beyond its conceptual framework? If an unknown aerial phenomenon did occur, the scribes would have had no vocabulary for aircraft or spacecraft. They would reach for the closest analogues in their world, describing brilliant objects as fiery disks or circles of fire, and interpreting strange effects as the breath of a celestial being. The value of the Tulli papyrus story, then, may not be as proof of ancient astronauts, but as a thought experiment in historical perspective. It challenges us to wonder what other records of extraordinary events might lie buried in ancient archives, waiting to be read not as mythology, but as potential reports from the edge of the known world. Those celestial mysteries recorded on papyrus speak of phenomena beyond understanding, but the most compelling evidence for a lost technology is not written. It is carved directly into the hardest stones on Earth. Deep within the shadowy galleries of the Serapeum of Saqqara and scattered across other ancient sites lie artifacts that defy simple explanation, massive stone boxes and sarcophagi carved from solid blocks of granite and diorite. It is not their size that confounds engineers, but the details found upon them, specifically the boreholes. These are not rough, chiseled depressions. They are clean, circular holes, some several inches deep, drilled into this immensely hard stone. Under magnification, the interior surfaces of these holes reveal a telltale signature, clear, consistent spiral grooves running in a continuous corkscrew pattern from the surface down into the depths of the stone. This pattern is the unmistakable fingerprint of a core drill. The mechanics are straightforward in principle. A hollow tube, perhaps made of copper, is rotated against the stone while an abrasive slurry of sand and water is fed into the contact point. The tube grinds its way down, leaving a solid core of stone inside it and creating the drilled hole around it. This much is accepted, but the practical reality of what the Egyptians achieved with this simple-sounding process is where the mystery truly lies. Granite and diorite rank among the hardest stones available, requiring modern diamond-tipped tools to work efficiently. To drill into them with a copper tube and sand is possible, but painfully slow. Yet the holes in these ancient boxes show a feed rate, the speed at which the drill penetrated the stone, that is astonishing. Modern experiments attempting to replicate the technique using reconstructed copper drills and quartz sand achieve a glacial pace, often taking days to drill just an inch or two into granite. The ancient holes, however, suggest a feed rate many times faster. The consistent, unbroken spiral grooves indicate the drill was not wobbling or pausing. It was applying immense, steady, downward pressure while rotating at a high, stable speed. This implies a mechanism capable of delivering tremendous, sustained torque and weight, far beyond what a single worker turning a bow drill could possibly manage. We are forced to envision a substantial machine, a drilling rig of sorts, with a weighted spindle and a means of driving it, perhaps with teams of laborers or even a form of mechanical advantage we have not yet considered. The precision is another layer of the puzzle. Many of these holes are perfectly parallel to each other and perpendicular to the stone's surface, even when drilled at the edge of a block where a handheld tool would almost certainly have skidded or angled off. This points to a fixed, stable platform, an industrial setup. These are not the marks of artisans patiently crafting jewelry. They are the scars of high-volume, precision stoneworking. The implications quietly dismantle the traditional workshop scene of men with chisels and mallets. This evidence speaks of an advanced mechanical understanding, of principles like consistent rotational force, axial load, and the use of abrasives for cutting rather than pounding. It points to a level of industrial capability, a systematized approach to shaping the very bones of the earth that mainstream history has not allocated to the dynastic Egyptians. These silent, spiraling grooves in granite are more than decoration. They are the physical record of a forgotten engineering paradigm, a language of machinery written in stone that we are only just beginning to decipher. The silent machinery of the past leaves its marks in stone, but what about the marks left in flesh and blood, in the very lineage of those who ruled? Our ninth mysterious find moves from the workshop to the laboratory, examining the genetic code preserved within the royal mummies themselves. Recent DNA studies, particularly on the controversial Amarna period pharaohs like Tutankhamun and his relatives, have unveiled a biological puzzle as intricate as any tomb. The results point to complex and unexpected family relationships, with genetic signatures that sometimes appear uncommon for the Nile Valley. Mainstream science rightly urges extreme caution here, highlighting the monumental challenges of studying ancient DNA. The material is often severely degraded, and centuries of handling, along with the possibility of contamination from modern sources, can easily skew results. For every study that suggests a surprise, others call for more rigorous testing and larger sample sizes. This is the slow, careful work of science, yet within those initial, tantalizing genetic whispers, alternative researchers hear a different story. They point to the occasional presence of traits, like certain rare blood groups or genetic markers, that seem statistically unusual for the indigenous population of ancient Egypt. This opens a door to speculation about distant origins. Could some royal lines have incorporated ancestry from far beyond Africa's borders, from the mountainous regions of Anatolia or the distant coasts of the Aegean? The mythology of Egypt itself fuels this speculation, brimming with stories of the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, semi-divine beings said to have ruled in the earliest times. The royal titulary often declared the pharaoh to be the son of Ra, a literal descendant of the sun god. We have always interpreted this as potent political and religious symbolism, a claim to divine right. But what if, within the cultural memory encoded in these myths, there lingered a faint echo of a different truth? What if the stories of god-kings and divine ancestry preserved a blurred recollection of actual, extraordinary ancestors, individuals whose distinct origins or exceptional qualities became mythologized over millennia? This is not to suggest literal aliens, but rather to consider that the historical narrative may be missing profound chapters of early migration, long-distance contact, or the inheritance of rare biological traits that set a ruling class apart. The genetic anomalies, however faint, intertwine with these mythological accounts to ask a profound question about the source of pharaonic power. Was legitimacy derived solely from political conquest and theological theater, or could it have been rooted, in part, in a perceived biological difference, a tangible link to a distant and venerated origin point that has since faded from history? The DNA does not yet provide clear answers, but it compels us to look at the golden masks and stone statues not just as icons of power, but as potential portraits of a much more interconnected and genetically complex ancient world than our textbooks have yet allowed. Genetic whispers from the royal bloodlines hint at a complex past, but sometimes the past seems to shout at us in a language we almost recognize. High on a ceiling beam within the temple of Seti I at Abydos, a cluster of hieroglyphs has become an internet sensation for a startling reason. To the modern eye, one symbol looks unmistakably like a sleek helicopter, complete with a cockpit, rotor blades, and a tail. Right beside it, another resembles a futuristic jet or perhaps a submarine, and a third brings to mind a kind of hovercraft or tank. The images are so crisp, so eerily familiar, that the immediate, thrilling question leaps to mind: did the ancient Egyptians have a vision of our technology? The mainstream explanation provided by Egyptologists is both logical and demystifying. They identify this as a classic example of a palimpsest in stone. The original ceiling relief carved for Pharaoh Seti I celebrated his name and titles within traditional cartouches. Years later, his son, the great Ramesses II, had some of these carvings carefully chiseled out and replastered to inscribe his own names and honors in their place. Over centuries, the plaster filler has fallen away, and erosion has worn down the edges of both the original and the recarved symbols. What we see today is not a single, intentional image, but a layered accident, a composite ghost where the lines of Seti's hieroglyphs and the lines of Ramesses' overcarving have merged. The helicopter, for instance, is likely the result of a Ramesses' cartouche overlapping and blending with parts of Seti's earlier titles. It is a convincing archaeological argument, a story of royal vanity and natural decay. Yet, even with this rational explanation in hand, the power of the image does not fully fade. The coincidence is so spectacularly precise that it feels like more than mere chance. It captivates because it taps into a deeper, almost primal question about how symbols work across time. Hieroglyphs were not just an alphabet, they were a complete symbolic system, where a single image could convey a sound, a word, or an entire concept. The Ankh meant life, the Eye of Horus represented protection and healing. What if, in their quest to encode complex ideas about power, travel, and the cosmos, the ancient priests developed a visual shorthand that, through a bizarre twist of erosion, now resolves into shapes that our modern brains can only interpret as machines? This is not to say they carved blueprints, but perhaps they carved concepts, velocity, ascension, navigation through unseen realms, that we, separated by millennia, instinctively map onto the vehicles that fulfill those same functions for us. The Abydos glyphs challenge us in a unique way. They force a choice between two compelling narratives, one of random geological serendipity and one of profound symbolic resonance. Whether a palimpsest or a prophecy, Their true mystery lies in their ability to make us wonder if the language of the future was somehow hidden all along in the sacred stone of the past. Those glyphs at Abydos play tricks on the mind, but the evidence waiting in the dark beneath Saqqara is a physical fact of staggering weight. The Serapeum is an underground labyrinth, a network of long, straight tunnels carved deep into the bedrock. Lining these silent corridors are the most perplexing objects in all of Egypt, over 20 giant boxes carved from a single piece of solid granite or even harder diorite. Calling them sarcophagi feels almost insufficient. Each one is a behemoth weighing between 70 and 100 tons, with a lid that itself matches that impossible weight. Their scale alone is humbling, but it is their finish that truly defies comprehension. In the flicker of a flashlight, their surfaces gleam with a mirror-like polish, so flat and flawless that they seem to be made of liquid stone frozen in time. The interior corners where two walls meet are not just roughly squared, they are perfect 90-degree angles, sharp and precise as if cut by a modern machine tool. This is not the work of artisans with chisels and sand. This is the signature of a technology that could plane granite as if it were wood. The official explanation is that these were the final resting places for the sacred Apis bulls, incarnations of the god Ptah, whose passing was a national event. Yet this purpose creates a dissonance that echoes in the tunnels. The effort expended here is of a completely different order than anything else associated with animal veneration. Why would a culture, even one that revered animals, choose the hardest stone on earth, shape it with inhuman precision, and then maneuver these 100-ton monoliths down narrow, steep ramps into a cramped underground maze, all for the remains of a bull? The logistics boggle the mind. How did they get these boxes into the tunnels? The passages are wide enough for the boxes, but only just, leaving inches of clearance on either side. There is no room for teams of workers to pull from the sides. The only way in would have been a dead straight pull from the front, requiring a traction system of phenomenal control to navigate the descent without shattering the boxes or the tunnel walls. Once inside, how were the lids, also weighing tons, positioned with such exactitude onto their bases? The mainstream view accepts the bovine purpose but struggles to explain the obsessive, over-engineered method. This mismatch between the stated purpose and the extravagant, almost fanatical execution leads to an inevitable question: what if we have the purpose backwards? What if the sacred bull was placed inside these boxes not because they were built for it, but because the boxes were already there, waiting in the dark, repurposed from an earlier, forgotten age? The Serapeum does not feel like a built tomb, it feels like a vault. The sheer technological priority on display, the choice to invest centuries of labor into creating perfect stone containers, suggests a function so vital it justified any cost. Were they designed to preserve something far more precious than bone, perhaps to shield something from the passage of time itself, or even from forces we can scarcely imagine? The silent, polished giants of the Serapeum ask not what they held, but what they were meant to withstand. While the giants of the Serapeum rest in subterranean silence, a much smaller artifact, tucked away in a Cairo museum case, asks a question about the sky. Discovered in a tomb at Saqqara and dated to around 200 years before the Common Era, this object is a simple carving in sycamore wood, just under 6 inches long. Officially, its museum label reads "bird model," and at a glance that seems reasonable. It is an ancient representation of a creature in flight, but look closer and the familiar begins to feel foreign. The object has a clean, streamlined fuselage, perfectly straight wings that are rigid and flat, and a distinct vertical tail fin. It is a design stripped of all unnecessary detail. There are no carved feathers, no etched eyes, no legs, and most tellingly, no head. What ancient artisan intending to depict a bird would omit the very head of the creature? The form that remains is pure geometry, a study in balanced aerodynamic surfaces. It looks less like a stylized animal and more like a modern balsa wood glider or a basic model airplane. This is not a matter of vague resemblance. The proportions align eerily well with principles of stable, unpowered flight. The wings are set at a slight dihedral angle, a feature that provides inherent stability in gliders. The weight distribution and the role of the tail fin all suggest an intuitive, if not explicit, understanding of how an object behaves in the air. The mainstream interpretation holds firm. It is a stylized bird, perhaps a falcon, a sacred symbol of the god Horus. Stylization was a cornerstone of Egyptian art, where symbolic essence often took precedence over photographic realism. A bird without a head could simply represent the concept of flight itself, or a ritual object meant for a specific, unknown purpose. This is a perfectly valid, scholarly perspective, yet the artifact's silent eloquence pushes back. If it is a bird, why does its form so cleanly bypass nature's blueprint in favor of a mechanical one? The debate it sparks goes to the heart of how knowledge emerges. Is this merely an incredible coincidence of design, a case where ancient artistic abstraction accidentally produced a shape that matches 20th century aeronautical engineering? Or does it represent something far more profound, the codification of observed principles? Imagine an ancient craftsman, perhaps a keen observer of the natural world, watching the effortless glide of a bird of prey on thermal currents. His mind abstracts the form, stripping away the living details of beak and feather to isolate the underlying structure that enables the miracle, the wing as a lifting surface, the tail as a rudder. In his hands, the observation becomes a physical model, not of the animal but of the force it commands. This would not mean the Saqqara artifact is a blueprint for a working aircraft, but it could be a fossilized moment of proto-engineering insight, a three-dimensional hypothesis about flight itself. It stands as a quiet testament to the human capacity to observe, abstract, and replicate natural principles, long before the formal science of aerodynamics was ever defined. This little wooden object challenges us to reconsider the boundaries of ancient thought, suggesting that the seeds of complex mechanical understanding may have been sown in the fertile ground of simple, inspired observation. From the elegant glide of a wooden model, we move to the precise language of numbers. While the Saqqara artifact hints at intuitive physics, a surviving papyrus offers a direct window into the Egyptian mind's formidable capacity for calculation. The Rhind papyrus, named for the Scottish antiquarian who purchased it in the 19th century, is often described as a practical textbook, dated to around 1,550 years before the Common Era, during the Second Intermediate Period. It is a copy of an even older document, a scribe's manual for solving the everyday problems of administration, construction, and trade. On its surface, it deals with distributing loaves of bread among men, calculating the slope of a pyramid, and figuring out the area of a field. Yet, within these mundane exercises lies a mathematical sophistication that quietly upends the notion of ancient numeracy as primitive. The Egyptian system was decimal, but they expressed fractions in a uniquely elegant way, primarily using unit fractions like 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, and so on. Any other fraction had to be broken down into a sum of these unit fractions. The Rhind papyrus provides a reference table for doing just that, decomposing complex fractions like 2/5 into 1/15 plus 1/3. This was not mere arithmetic, it was a form of early computational logic, a systematic method for handling quantities with remarkable precision. The papyrus also demonstrates a clear understanding of geometric principles, including formulas for the area of a circle and the volume of a cylindrical granary. Their method for approximating the area of a circle by subtracting 1/9 of the diameter and squaring the result yields a value for pi accurate to within less than 1%. This was not abstract theory for its own sake. It was applied mathematics of the highest order, developed to manage the real world. The deeper mystery, however, lies not in the solved problems, but in the unstated knowledge they imply. When the scribe calculates the seat or slope of a pyramid, he is working with the consistent, elegant proportions that define these structures. Researchers have long noted that the proportions of the Great Pyramid incorporate mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. The ratio of its perimeter to its height is approximately 2 pi. The ratio of the length of its face to its height closely approximates the golden ratio. The mainstream view is that these relationships could be the result of choosing a simple, practical seat, a slope that was both stable and aesthetically pleasing. The coincidence, they argue, emerges from the geometry itself, yet the existence of the Rhind papyrus complicates this dismissal. Here we have a culture that demonstrably possessed advanced computational skills and a deep empirical understanding of geometry. Is it truly a coincidence that their most monumental, sacred construction repeatedly resonates with these fundamental mathematical constants? Or does the papyrus represent the surviving fragment of a much deeper, potentially older, scientific tradition? The scribe was copying a practical handbook, not a theological treatise on sacred geometry. But what if the sacred geometry was simply the applied end of a profound scientific worldview, so ingrained that it didn't need to be explicitly stated in theoretical texts? The precision of the pyramids, therefore, may not be an accidental byproduct of simple slope selection. It could be the architectural expression of a codified, perhaps even secret, body of knowledge that understood the universe itself in mathematical terms. The Rhind papyrus is the clearest evidence we have that the builders of Egypt thought in numbers, and those numbers, silently etched into stone, suggest they were listening to a harmony most of us have forgotten how to hear. That mathematical harmony encoded in the Rhind papyrus found its physical echo not just in pyramids, but in a structure so immense its memory became legend. Classical historians like Herodotus and Strabo traveled to Egypt and returned with accounts that strained credibility. They spoke of the Labyrinth at Hawara, a colossal temple complex situated near the pyramid of Amenemhat III. Herodotus, who claimed to have walked its corridors himself, described a building that surpassed even the pyramids in the awe it inspired. He wrote of 3,000 rooms, half underground and half above, arranged in a bewildering circuit of courts and colonnades, walls covered in intricate carvings, a maze meant not to confuse, but to overwhelm the senses with the totality of divine and royal power. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as the exaggerated tales of impressionable tourists. The site at Hawara today is a heartbreaking scene, a vast, sandy depression littered with fragments of limestone and granite. The Great Labyrinth appears to have vanished, its stones systematically quarried over millennia to build cities like nearby Cairo, a common fate for many ancient monuments. The loss feels total, a grand erasure, yet modern technology has begun to whisper that the classical writers may not have been fantasizing. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the site have revealed startling anomalies beneath the sand, suggesting the presence of massive, grid-like underground structures, walls arranged with a precise, geometric order over an area that could indeed encompass a building of legendary scale. These ghostly echoes in the data are all we have left. If the radar images and the ancient testimonies are even partially correct, the implications are staggering. The labyrinth was not merely a temple. It was described as an administrative and religious capital, a place where every nome or province of Egypt had its own sacred chamber. This suggests a centralized, bureaucratic, and spiritual complex of a sophistication that simply does not exist in our current models of Middle Kingdom Egypt. Its scale implies a level of state organization, economic control, and architectural ambition that redefines our understanding of that era's capabilities. The true mystery of the labyrinth, therefore, is not really about its vanished halls. It serves as a profound metaphor for the fragility of history itself. Here was potentially one of the greatest architectural achievements of the ancient world, a building that classical authors ranked above the pyramids, and it has been almost completely scrubbed from the physical landscape, its story reduced to fragments and rumors. It forces a humbling question: how much of Egypt's true grandeur, its knowledge, its administrative genius, and its artistic zenith has been lost not to catastrophe, but to the slow, relentless recycling of stone by later generations. The empty field at Hawara stands as a silent warning that the historical record we study is merely the fraction that survived, a collection of fragments from which we must try to reconstruct a civilization that may have been far more vast, complex, and intellectually formidable than we can possibly know. The vanished halls of the labyrinth remind us how much can be erased by time, but in the open desert, some enigmatic objects refuse to be buried. Scattered across the desolate reaches of Egypt's western desert, far from the Nile's life-giving waters, lie artifacts of profound simplicity and mystery, the stone spheres. These are not the pebbles smoothed by a river's flow. They are massive, often larger than a beach ball, with some specimens measuring over 1 meter or 3 feet in diameter. Their most striking feature is their shape, a near-perfect roundness that feels deliberate, intentional, in a landscape defined by wind-sculpted chaos. Geologists who have examined them confirm they are not natural concretions, the spherical stones that sometimes form around a nucleus in sedimentary rock. The desert spheres show subtle but consistent signs of human work, facets of pecking or grinding that suggest they were shaped patiently toward an ideal form. They were brought to this state of roundness by someone for some reason we cannot fathom, and that is the heart of the puzzle, their complete isolation from context. They are found in remote areas, often in groups, but with no associated settlement, no workshop debris, no hieroglyphic inscription to explain their presence. They sit under the sun, silent and alien. This absence of any frame of reference has spawned a garden of theories. Were they symbolic representations of celestial bodies, perhaps used in some forgotten desert astronomy ritual to track the sun or stars? Could they have been practical weights or rollers, part of a monumental transport system for which all other evidence has vanished? Some researchers have even proposed they are the byproduct of an unknown manufacturing process, perhaps test pieces or grinding cores left behind from a larger operation. Each idea feels plausible, yet each is ultimately a guess echoing in a vacuum. Their true power as a mystery lies not in any single theory, but in what their existence represents, a glaring hole in the tapestry. Our understanding of ancient Egypt is built from tombs, temples, and texts, the grand and the ceremonial. The stone spheres belong to none of these categories. They speak of an activity, perhaps mundane, perhaps deeply sacred, that was so commonplace it was never thought worthy of recording in a tomb painting or a papyrus scroll. They are a stark, physical reminder that the archaeological record is not a complete library, but a handful of surviving pages from a vast encyclopedia. Whole chapters of daily life, of ritual practice, of technological experimentation may have left no trace except for these enigmatic, perfect forms sitting in the sand, waiting for a question we have not yet thought to ask. The silent, perfect spheres in the desert speak of a purpose we have lost, but high above them, a grander and far more precise intention was written across the sky itself. The alignment of Egyptian temples with celestial bodies is not a vague notion of reverence, it is an exacting science carved in stone. Walk into the heart of the temple of Amun-Re at Karnak on the day of the winter solstice, and you will witness a carefully engineered spectacle. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, its final rays align perfectly along the temple's main axis, flooding the innermost sanctuary with a beam of golden light, a symbolic rebirth of the sun god at the year's darkest point. This is not a happy accident. It is the result of meticulous planning, requiring architects to understand the sun's shifting path along the horizon with extraordinary precision. This celestial choreography extends beyond the sun. The narrow shafts emanating from the so-called King's Chamber within the Great Pyramid are famously aligned with specific stars, one pointing toward the pole star of its era, Alpha Draconis, and another targeting the belt of the constellation Orion, associated with the god Osiris. These alignments go far beyond simple observation of the night sky. They represent a deep, systematic integration of astronomy into the very fabric of spiritual and state architecture. To achieve such precision, the ancient astronomers needed to track the slow, gradual wobble of Earth's axis, a cycle known as precession that takes 26,000 years to complete. The stars targeted by the pyramid's shafts were only in that exact position for a specific window of time. This implies a tradition of observation maintained not for years, but for generations, a sacred duty to record the heavens with unwavering dedication. The accuracy required for these long-term alignments suggests something profound, a continuous, sophisticated program of astronomical science that may have taken root long before the first pharaoh united Egypt. Could the foundational knowledge, the precise coordinates, and the understanding of precessional cycles have been inherited from a much older, precursor civilization utterly obsessed with mapping the heavens? The temples and pyramids, then, are not just monuments to kings, but perhaps the final, magnificent expressions of a celestial doctrine perfected in a forgotten age, a way of anchoring their entire cosmology, their understanding of life, death, and renewal to the immutable clockwork of the stars. That celestial clockwork required tools of immense precision to carve into reality. Yet the very instruments we believe were used for this task present one of the most practical and stubborn mysteries of all. The official story is clear. The pyramids, the statues, the obelisks were all shaped by workers wielding simple tools of copper and stone. Copper chisels, stone dolerite pounders, and abrasive quartz sand are the accepted toolkit. It sounds logical, even elegant in its simplicity. But when you take these tools into a modern workshop and try to replicate the ancient achievements, the story begins to unravel. Copper is a relatively soft metal. When a copper chisel is struck against granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, the metal doesn't bite deeply into the rock. It deforms, flattens, and wears away with astonishing speed. Experiments show that a copper chisel would become useless, its edge completely blunted, after cutting just a few inches into such hard stone. To create the millions of cubic feet of precisely cut granite found at Giza alone, the ancient workshops would have needed not just a few chisels, but mountains of them, requiring a copper mining and smelting operation of staggering and historically unattested scale. The logistical paradox is deafening. How could a culture with such a soft metal tool produce such an immense volume of flawless hard stonework at the pace the conventional timeline demands, without leaving behind vast industrial evidence of tool production and replacement? The abrasive sand theory offers a partial answer, suggesting that workers sawed or ground the stone using sand slurry and a copper saw, letting the hard quartz particles do the cutting. This method works, but it is agonizingly slow, and it struggles to explain the crisp, clean interior angles and mirror finishes seen in places like the Serapeum boxes. The conundrum forces us to look at the evidence with new eyes. Perhaps the copper we find in tombs and settlements was for everyday use, while a specialized, guarded craft knowledge employed a different technology entirely. One compelling possibility is the use of lost alloys. The Egyptians were master metallurgists, creating beautiful works in gold and bronze. Could they have developed a hardened copper alloy, perhaps through a secret annealing process or the addition of other elements, that created a tool far more durable than plain copper, a formula that was lost when the guilds that knew it faded from history. Another possibility is that they used tools made from materials that simply did not survive the millennia. Imagine cutting discs made from a resilient stone like emery, mounted on a lathe like apparatus, or even large, toothed saws made from a harder, now corroded metal. The most radical suggestion looks not at the tool, but at the method itself. What if the builders employed a technique we have not yet conceived, one that softened the stone temporarily through the application of sound, vibration, or a chemical agent derived from plants, making it malleable for shaping before it rehardened? This might sound like fantasy, but it is a hypothesis born from the sheer scale of the mismatch between the presumed tools and the work accomplished. The unfinished obelisk in Aswan provides a crucial clue here, not in what was finished, but in what was left behind. The trenches around it show the marks of the pounding stones, but the obelisk itself was never detached. Was this because the technique for the final, most delicate stage of separation was a specialized one, lost in that moment of failure? This is not a call for alien technology, but for human ingenuity of an order we have underestimated. The copper tool's conundrum is a silent, powerful argument that our understanding of ancient industry is incomplete. It suggests that the true secrets of Egyptian construction may not be hidden in a lost library, but in the forgotten chemistry of their workshops and the vanished motions of their most skilled artisans' hands. Yet the tools that shaped the stone were only one part of the equation, for the true purpose of these monuments was to house a vision of the cosmos itself. Carved onto the walls of pyramids from the late Old Kingdom, the pyramid texts are the oldest known religious writings in the world. To call them prayers would be a profound simplification. They are a dense, poetic, and often bewildering collection of spells, incantations, and declarations, intended to guide the soul of the departed pharaoh through the perilous journey to the afterlife. Their language is archaic, filled with cryptic symbolism and sudden, vivid imagery. They speak of a watery, formless void that existed before creation, known as the Nun, from which the first mound of land and the sun god emerged. They describe the pharaoh not merely dying but transforming, ascending to join the circumpolar stars, the so-called imperishable ones, in a celestial rebirth. The rituals are meticulously detailed, involving offerings, purifications, and the recitation of powerful words that could open gates in the sky and command the gods themselves. This is not primitive animism, it is a fully formed, intricate theology. The sheer sophistication of these texts, appearing suddenly in the 5th and 6th dynasties, presents a quiet but powerful mystery. Scholars widely agree they are not an invention of that moment, but the written codification of a far older oral tradition, a sacred knowledge passed down through generations of priests long before it was ever committed to stone. This means the philosophical roots of Egyptian civilization run much deeper than the archaeological record of its state formation. The concepts embedded within these spells hint at a profound and ancient worldview. There is a clear understanding of cyclical time, of death and renewal mirrored in the Nile's flood and the sun's daily journey. The goal of the pharaoh's ascent is not to escape the world, but to become an eternal part of its celestial machinery, ensuring the continued order of the universe. This suggests the early Egyptian state may have been built not just on military power or economic control, but on the foundation of a pre-existing, advanced spiritual and cosmological system. The pyramid, therefore, was more than a tomb. It was a machine built from words and stone, designed to execute a precise cosmic operation formulated in a forgotten age. The texts challenge us to listen not just to what they say, but to the echoes of the immense, unrecorded history of thought that resonates within their lines. The profound cosmology of the pyramid texts required a physical reality built by the hands of thousands, a truth etched not in sacred tombs but in the dusty walls of a working quarry. At Gebel el-Silsila, the primary source of Nubian sandstone for Egypt's greatest temples, the story shifts from divine kings to the anonymous workers who moved mountains. Here, the cliff faces are not silent. They are a sprawling, open-air archive of graffiti, but this is no casual vandalism. These are detailed pictorial records and texts left by the quarry gangs themselves, offering a rare, grassroots view of the industrial machine that fueled a civilization's ambition. We see depictions of the very boats that would carry these colossal blocks down the Nile, yet some of these illustrated vessels are of a size and structure that defy conventional understanding. They show craft far larger and more robust than the reed and wooden boats traditionally believed to have transported multi-ton obelisks and temple pillars, suggesting a hidden chapter in ancient nautical engineering. Alongside these images are textual records naming the work crews, often numbering in the thousands, and documenting their output with the bureaucratic precision of a modern project manager. We read of the Friends of Khnum, or the Vigorous Gang, teams who took pride in their work and left their mark for eternity. This evidence paints a picture of a society capable of mobilizing, feeding, housing, and managing a vast, skilled workforce with an efficiency that feels startlingly modern. It challenges the simplistic Hollywood image of endless toiling slaves driven solely by the whip. At Gebel el-Silsila, we see signatures of identity and organization, hinting at a complex labor system that likely combined seasonal conscription, skilled permanent artisans, and a sense of shared monumental purpose. The quarry marks tell us that the true wonder of Egypt may not have been the magic of its gods, but the breathtaking human logistics of turning a cliff into a temple, one precisely measured block and one recorded crew at a time. That human story of logistics and pride at Gebel el-Silsila gave rise to forms of staggering ambition, forms that were meant to culminate in a single, brilliant point. The Red Pyramid at Dosha, named for the warm hue of its limestone, stands as a landmark in architectural evolution, the first successful attempt at building a true, smooth-sided pyramid. Yet when you look toward its summit, something crucial is missing. The very top is flat, a bare platform of stone. The capstone, the pyramidion that should have completed its perfect geometry, is gone. Mainstream archaeology offers a straightforward explanation. It was likely pried off in antiquity, a victim of looters seeking valuable metals. This is a perfectly reasonable, even likely, scenario. But the empty space it left behind is more than just a missing piece of stone. It is a profound silence at the pinnacle of achievement. This absence forces us to ask what exactly we have lost. What was the nature of that final, crowning element? Historical records and a few rare surviving examples, like the beautifully inscribed pyramidion of Amenem, Hat III, now in the Cairo Museum, give us clues. They were often made from fine granite or basalt, and texts describe them being covered in electrum, a shimmering alloy of gold and silver. Imagine the sun striking that apex, transforming the entire structure into a colossal beacon of reflected light, a man-made mountain of earth crowned with captured sunlight. It would have been visible for miles, a dazzling statement of divine connection, but was its purpose purely symbolic, a brilliant hat for a royal tomb? Or did it serve a more active, perhaps even energetic, role? The pyramidion was not just decoration, it was the completion of the form, the point where all the converging lines of the structure's sacred geometry finally met. In many spiritual traditions, the apex is considered a focal point, a place where energies are concentrated or directed. Could the choice of electrum, a highly conductive metal, have been intentional, designed to interact with the atmosphere, to attract or channel some force perceived by the ancient builders? Some researchers have proposed that the capstone, especially if made of or coated in conductive material, could have acted in concert with the pyramid's shape and the dry desert air to create subtle electrical phenomena, perhaps even a faint, visible glow or corona effect during storms, an awe-inspiring display interpreted as the presence of the god. The Red Pyramid's missing apex, therefore, represents the ultimate unanswered question. We can study the ramp systems, calculate the stone counts, and decipher the texts on the walls, but the final piece, the element that truly finished and potentially activated the entire monument according to its original design, is lost to us. Its absence is a powerful metaphor for our quest to understand ancient Egypt. We have the vast, magnificent body of the civilization laid out before us, but we are forever reaching for that crowning insight, that key piece of knowledge that would make the entire mysterious structure suddenly perfectly clear. Standing before the empty apex of the Red Pyramid, we feel the absence of a final answer. But when we step back, far back, and look across the entire landscape of mysteries we have explored, that singular feeling of absence transforms into something else entirely, a pattern of presence. These 20 finds are not isolated, disconnected oddities scattered randomly through time. They are echoes of the same signal, repeating themes that weave together into a tapestry far different from the one in our textbooks. The first and most persistent thread is one of impossible precision. From the micrometer-perfect joints of the Great Pyramid to the machined smoothness of the Serapeum boxes, from the lathe-turned symmetry of the schist disk to the flawless celestial alignments of the temples, we see a signature. It is the signature of a culture that did not approximate, it measured, and it measured with a standard of accuracy that seems to leapfrog over the presumed technological progression of the Bronze Age. This is not the work of trial and error, it is the hallmark of an established, codified engineering science. Interwoven with this precision is a profound and practical grasp of the cosmos. The alignment of pyramid shafts with specific stars, the solstitial light shows in temple sanctuaries. These are not acts of simple reverence for the sun and moon. They are the product of meticulous generational observation, an understanding of celestial mechanics, including the slow precession of the Earth's axis, that was then hardwired into sacred architecture. This suggests a long-term scientific tradition, a dedicated priesthood of the sky whose records may have begun in an epoch long before the first dynastic pharaoh. Then there are the whispers of a different kind of energy, hints of a physics that extended beyond levers and ramps. The Dendera relief's uncanny imagery, the practical potential of the Baghdad Battery, even the speculation about the conductive capstones, all point toward an investigation of natural forces, electricity, light, and energy that mainstream history does not grant to this era. These are not clear blueprints for machines, but they are conceptual footprints, suggestions that their understanding of the natural world may have included principles we consider modern. Perhaps the most challenging pattern of all is the one written in stone and geology, the suggestion of a timeline that does not fit. The water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure, the sheer sophistication of artifacts like the schist disk at the very dawn of dynastic history, and the scale of projects like the unfinished obelisk that seem to demand a forgotten method, all pull our gaze backward into a foggy prehistory. They hint at a precursor age, a lost chapter where this knowledge was not being invented, but perhaps being applied, preserved, or even inherited. When you view these anomalies in isolation, it is easy for conventional scholarship to explain each one away, a palimpsest here, a stylistic choice there, an unusual but possible interpretation over here. But the true power of this collection lies in their convergence. It is the sheer consistency across different domains, architecture, artifact creation, astronomy, and even textual accounts, that makes the coincidence argument strain. A single anomaly might be a mistake, but a chorus of them, all singing a similar song of advanced knowledge and lost time, begins to sound like a counter-melody to mainstream history. This does not demand a conclusion of alien intervention or supernatural aid. It points compellingly toward a human possibility, a forgotten high culture, or a peak period of technological and scientific achievement within our own ancestral story. Such a culture, if it existed and later declined, could have left behind its colossal works and its refined crafts. Its surviving knowledge, fragmented and incomprehensible to later peoples struggling through a dark age, would naturally have been woven into myth, ritual, and symbolism. The gods who descended from the sky in fiery discs, the followers of Horus who ruled in the earliest times, the divine science of Thoth, these could be the mythologized memories of a real, advanced predecessor civilization. The patterns we see in the stones are the fingerprints of that lost world, a world whose history was not recorded on papyrus, but built into the very fabric of the land, waiting for us to learn how to read it again. The patterns we have traced are not random noise in the historical record, but a resonant signal pointing toward a profound possibility. Our journey through these 20 mysterious finds reveals an ancient Egypt far more enigmatic and technologically sophisticated than textbooks often allow. This is not about replacing one dogma with another, but about expanding the conversation. The potential for a forgotten understanding of energy, hinted at in the shadows of Dendera, the silent testimony of water erosion on the Sphinx that speaks of a different climate, the almost machined perfection of stone boxes that defy our simplest tools, these are not fringe ideas to be dismissed, but genuine puzzles that challenge the edges of our knowledge. Together, they build a compelling case for re-examining the origins and capabilities of this foundational civilization. This re-examination does not require us to abandon science, but to embrace its true spirit, curiosity. Mainstream archaeology and science rightly demand rigorous evidence, peer review, and methodological caution, and this framework protects us from fantasy. Yet, within that necessary rigor, there must always be room for the unanswered question, for the artifact that does not fit neatly on the shelf. These mysteries serve as vital reminders that history is not a closed book with a final chapter written in stone, but an ongoing investigation, a living dialogue between the past and the present. Each new technological tool, from ground-penetrating radar to advanced material analysis, offers a fresh chance to read the old stones in a new light. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this exploration is not a definitive answer about capstones or batteries, but a renewed sense of wonder. It is an invitation to look at the familiar silhouettes of the pyramids and the stoic face of the Sphinx not as solved monuments, but as active questions. We encourage you to take that sense of curiosity with you, to research these topics further from a variety of perspectives, and to engage in the conversation. What piece of evidence resonates most with you? Where do you think the balance lies between established history and mysterious anomaly? Share your own thoughtful theories and reflections in the comments below, as this collective pondering is how understanding grows. If journeys into history's greatest puzzles captivate you, consider subscribing for more deep dives that challenge what we think we know. The sands of Egypt still hold secrets, and the search for their meaning is a story that continues with every curious mind that dares to look and to wonder.